IoT Unplugged, where we talk to industry leaders, innovators, and major players in the Internet of Things, bringing you the best and latest insights. Tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm joined by Ulderico Arcidiaco, founder of Sfera Labs. He talks about why they have built their products on Raspberry Pi, engineering considerations for designing industrial systems, and lessons from real-world deployments. Hi, Ulderico. Thank you so much for joining me on IoT Unplugged.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Let's start off with a quick introduction to who you are and what you do.
All right. Okay. Oh, well, I am an electronic and software engineer by education. I always like to play with software and electronics since I was a kid. I think I started around when I was around 12, more or less. Uh, and this has always been more hobby than a profession for me. I'm also an amateur radio operator, glider and private pilot, enjoy sailing, do all these things that are a little bit, let's say, technical in my life. I've been working professionally in the design of, let's say, mission critical software architectures and infrastructures, starting at large multinational consulting companies like Accenture many, many years ago, and then moved on and founded a couple of startups. One of these evolved into a pretty large team of over, let's say, 1,000, 1,200 people about 25 years ago, 20 years ago. And then I think it was like around 2005, almost by accident, I started to look at the home and building automation market, and I became attracted by the potential in that area, and started a new startup specifically focused on this. Um, and the goal there was to design a platform to easily integrate the different standards that were present in the market back then, and the situation is not very different now. And so we did that. And I think when the iPhone was introduced a couple of years later, I I became one of the first people in the world that I had full control of my home using the iPhone, because there were no apps back then, only web-based software that you could build to run on the iPhone, and our platform was web-based. So that was interesting. I went around playing with the lights and cameras and security system of my house from the iPhone, and when nobody was basically doing to do anything close to that. But anyways, that was a long time ago. But there is a connection with Sfera Labs, because that was software, but we wanted to have control on the hardware. Back then, that software was running on industrial, off the shelf, let's say industrial PCs, but we wanted to have more control on the hardware side. And so when Raspberry Pi was introduced, we saw an opportunity to use the Raspberry Pi as the hardware core for that software. And this is basically where Sfera Labs started.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk then about how you see Raspberry Pi being this really key foundation. So I understand that, I mean, you touched on it. You were looking at open standards. You were looking at making things more accessible. So what was it about Raspberry Pi that interested you and that you saw in it the potential to use it as a foundation?
Yeah, that's a great question, and yes, I think that this small piece of let's say history that I was mentioning is just an example of a good example of that, actually. Basically, as I said, we had this software. There was a software platform for building automation that is still quite popular and today. And that thing was just a piece of software. As I said, it was running on industrial PCs. When I think the second version of the Raspberry Pi came out, and as we all know, the Raspberry Pi was initially a small board that Eben and others in the team thought of as a tinkering platform, as a PC where you could easily play and don't be, let's say, too concerned of destroying it because it was so cheap and whatever. So it was mostly intended for educational purposes. But that was a full Linux computer where you could run actual applications on that. And when that came out, we started just playing with it, and just for fun, we ported our software on the Raspberry Pi, and it worked just fine. Problem was that our software is something that runs a building, so it runs 24/7 and for many years. And you just cannot do that by basically running a piece of software on a Raspberry Pi without anything around it. So we started asking what we needed to be able to actually use a Raspberry Pi, but with the let's say proper stuff around it to make it suitable for this kind of high reliability, long lasting applications. And we designed a board that basically attached to the Raspberry Pi, adding some extra features like power supply, UPS, real-time clock, watchdog, all the stuff. I don't want to bother you on that. Then we made an enclosure that could fit into a standard electrical panel with the appropriate safety in taken into account, and perform all compliance testing and started using it internally as something that we could run our software on it. And then we said, well, if it works well for us, it could be useful for others as well. And this is how Sfera Labs started, basically. So this kind of path of adopting Raspberry Pi to do something is I think a good example. And I know many others, follow the same path to come out with products based on Raspberry Pi. And this is in the end what Sfera Labs does.
So picking up on the journey you just described, you had to adapt it so your software could run on it. You briefly alluded to the fact that you guys are catering to buildings that are going to need to run continuously, and obviously created a solution that could work. So what is it about the solutions that you made that make it so well suited to industrial IT environments? If you can get into the technicals a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there are many things actually. First of all, the Raspberry Pi is a computing platform for us. So it's a core where you can run software, like what we call full stack software. That means not just a microcontroller, but everything, a full operating system with lots of storage, connectivity, all the features that you normally have on an industrial PC or on a data center server, but just on a smaller size, lower cost, and more flexibility in the end. So what we did is for our own need. We basically added all the features that we need to have, and this created basically what we now refer to as edge server. That is basically a server similar to a server that you have running in a data center, but that you run locally at the edge. So where basically your needs are in terms of interaction with the physical world, and that's I think the Raspberry Pi is great for this kind of applications because it's a flexible architecture that allows you to build a full feature server that is small, relatively cheap, but at the same time very, very reliable. These are the, let's say, key ingredients. And of course, the path to achieve that is not particularly easy, but it's made much easier than starting from scratch. The starting from like a CPU and building everything around it, like you would if you had to develop, let's say, a server from scratch. Being able to start from the Raspberry Pi core, you already have a number of things that the core platform provides that you don't have to care about. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, is the fact that the Raspberry Pi is, let's say, very much community driven in the sense that it has millions of people playing with it. Well, I think that up to, I don't know, I'm not up to date, but I think last year they passed 60 million units sold. So there is a huge community developing all sorts of things on Raspberry Pi. So if you have a Raspberry Pi computing core, you take advantage of all these things for free. That's your starting point, okay? And on top of that, you can build your own stuff. That's the key in general terms of why the Raspberry Pi is a good core for IoT applications, because you get a lot of stuff from day one, basically when you start thinking of a new product.
And hearing you mention the community that continually contributes to it, I think is a good link to what you were talking about earlier with open source. I think you said something like you were interested in it before you founded the company, and you're still interested in it now. I was curious to know what you're seeing in terms of the adoption of open source technologies and standards, and whether you think the industry has embraced it, let's say.
Yeah. Well, the open source is everywhere now. I still remember, I'm old enough to remember when open source software was really not well received and accepted in let's say professional environments, if we can say that way. Like in large IT organizations, the idea of using a piece of software that was open, so that there was nobody really in charge of supporting it, was something that was really, let's say, inconceivable for many back then. And then fast forward to now, think of Linux and what it is. Linux is everywhere. And with that, a huge let's say amount of software that comes with it and runs with it, or even on other platforms, that is widely adopted. Linux is basically at the core of pretty much everything that you have around in terms of computing, and now it's perfectly normal. Same thing goes for hardware platforms. Hardware platforms have been, of course, harder to move to open, or not necessarily open, but let's say out of the clear, typical industrial path of products. When I say industrial path of products, I mean like a product that is designed by a company that is completely proprietary, only supported by that company, and keeps going for a long time. This is typical in automation, like PLCs and stuff like that. Now, the fact that we are now proposing the idea and offering the idea of running this kind of industrial applications on platforms that have been originally designed for something else is not very different from the idea of running your IT systems on Linux rather than on a proprietary operating system, in a sense. And the path is similar in technology. All these, let's say, hard lines between something and something else, they tend to, let's say, disappear in time. Uh, and and this is just one case. So here we have a Raspberry Pi that was initially conceived as something for the educational market only, that they wanted to build just a few thousands of units initially, and that is now used mostly in industrial applications everywhere. and they've sold tens of millions of units. Originally, they were not thinking of that. It came out. It evolved from some sort of a natural selection process. And that's how it goes. When technology evolves quickly, natural selection happens as well, and things pop out as successful solutions because they had something good in their mix. And that shows because they become widely adopted and then used on in many more markets than originally intended.
Sure. Do you think then that wider adoption of open source was inevitable? It was something that you saw happening, I suppose, something that you saw was going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it was inevitable when it started. Once it started, and the thing dates back to much, let's say, many things that came before Linux. But when Linux came out, it was really a turning point, in my opinion, with Linux and all the software that came with that. And again, from software to hardware. That was the next step. It took longer, of course, because hardware has its own complexity. It's not easy. Now we have to remember that Raspberry Pi is not open in terms of hardware, properly said. When we say open, it means that the design is fully open, that you can maybe copy it, modify it, and whatever. Raspberry Pi is not open in that sense, but it is extremely well known, and basically not much of it is kept as a secret. Um, the only thing is that compared to software, it is much more important for hardware to be, let's say, under control in terms of evolution, because there are many other aspects that you have to take into account. Think of like compliance testing, certification, stuff like that, that make it much harder to do if the product is open and available to everybody. But the thing for Raspberry is that while it is not open, it is still very open in terms of knowledge, and that's the key point. For me, the most important thing of being open is not the ownership of something, but how open is the knowledge, the information around the product. That makes a big difference, and that's what made Raspberry Pi popular. Not that it was open per se, but that it was super easy for people to access all the information they needed to develop their own things. And that's the same thing that what we did as Sfera Labs, as a company, not just as a say maker or hobbyist. It's at Sfera Labs when we started designing products based on Raspberry Pi. At the very beginning, we had basically no relationship with Raspberry. Of course, now we have, but in terms of interaction and engineering discussions and stuff like that. But back then, we just grabbed the Raspberry Pi and we had all we needed to develop a product around that without having to ask anybody. And when I say open, that's what I really believe open means and why it is important.
So, in the spirit of knowledge sharing, then to pick up this point, and from your experience, what are some of the engineering considerations that need to be taken into account when companies are designing industrial systems based on Raspberry Pi?
Well, yeah. Well, many things actually, because when you develop an hardware product, well, that's not particularly easy. It's, of course, much easier to develop a product when you start from something, not just from the bare components, but from something, and you build around something that is already existing. Similar to what you do in software, then when you build software, you always build software using libraries and other components. You, of course, almost never start from scratch. The same is true for a piece of hardware, and developing a piece of hardware that runs on Raspberry Pi really helps because you have You have many different things that have been already taken care of by the Raspberry Pi itself. But there are still many others that you need to engineer yourself. The mechanical part, for example, is the starting point. Uh, the Raspberry Pi is a board, and the board itself, you always need to put it inside an enclosure based on the mechanical requirements that you have. Um, Mechanical means the enclosure itself and where it has to go, but also how the Raspberry Pi is interconnected with the other electronics that you have built. And it seems simple, but it is actually a challenge. And because everything is in an enclosure and runs in a specific environment, you have all the thermal considerations. It's not like when you run a Raspberry Pi naked on your desk that you don't care of temperatures uh, really much. But when you have to have this product based on Raspberry Pi or anything else that runs in an industrial environment, thermal considerations become extremely important for long-term reliability as well as for the actual operation of the product. This is quite a complex thing that requires a lot of testing, a lot of tweaking and redesigns, and surprises. Then Raspberry Pi. Well, we've been talking about Raspberry Pi in general, but there are actually two. I don't know if you would like to go into this, but there are basically two main lines, two different parallel lines for Raspberry Pi when being used in a product. One is the Raspberry Pi that everybody knows, is the Raspberry Pi that has been traditionally called the Model B up to Raspberry Pi 4. Then on Raspberry Pi 5, they dropped the name Model B. But that's the board that everybody knows, the small board with the Ethernet and the four USB ports. Then on the side, the power supply and video port, etc. And the micro SD slot. That's one thing. The other thing is what is called the compute module. The compute module, the Raspberry Pi compute module, is basically, think of a Raspberry Pi. You strip it of every peripheral, every port, Ethernet, USB, power supply, even the GPIO connector. You remove everything, and you're left with the CPU, memory, GPU, and a few other things around. And that is basically the essential computing platform without any of the peripherals. Now, the compute module is something that has been designed a few years after the original Raspberry, specifically to tailor the needs of, let's say, deep integration. That is when you design a product that is basically completely different from the original concept of the Raspberry Pi. So you need different ports. You maybe don't need things that the Raspberry Pi, the original Raspberry Pi has. They are just in the way of what you need to do, or you need a different mechanical form factor. And that's where the compute module shines, because it allows you to have a lot more flexibility. Now, back to your original question, when you design a product that is built on the compute module, you have to take care of many more things compared to what you need to do with the normal Raspberry Pi, because all the peripherals like Ethernet, microSD, if you have one, USB, PCI Express, HDMI, and all the high speed. These are all high speed lines with complex requirements in terms of signal integrity, because they go very fast. And these things they now become your own concern. So the engineering considerations become much wider, more complex in a sense, but the reward of that is that you have a lot more flexibility in the design of your products. And at Sfera Labs, we do both. Basically, there is not a better way or a best way to do things in our opinion. In fact, we have products based on the normal Raspberry Pi. Actually, our first products were all based on the normal Raspberry Pi. Very simply, honestly, it was easier to build these products at the beginning of our journey several years ago. But then, when as we evolved with new needs, more complex requirements, we gradually moved to the compute module, so that basically all of our most advanced products are now based on the compute module rather than the Raspberry Pi, the normal Raspberry Pi.
And yeah, presumably you guys still reap the rewards of moving to compute module, even if it meant in the short term you had some issues or challenges to iron out.
Yeah, basically the challenges that you have when designing a product are not, let's say, specific of the Raspberry Pi itself. Is something general for every product. Every product, when you design a product, is you run into surprises sooner or later. Unfortunately, surprises in hardware design and the iterations in the design cycles that you do. Are more painful than what you need to than what you do normally in software. Uh, Back in my previous life when I was just a simple, let's say, software engineer, of course, you made mistakes. Change something in your software, boom, you're ready with a new version. With hardware, of course, the let's say the time to go with these iterations is much longer. We're talking sometimes months to redesign a board at the prototype stage for the new version to happen. So it's very hard to predict what's going on in terms of the development cycle of your product. Again, the Raspberry Pi really helps because the you have many things that have been already they've been taken care of by the Raspberry Pi designers, but you're left with your own challenges. And consider that in terms of complexity, what you build around the Raspberry Pi can be very complex. Um, excuse me, the bill of materials, so the amount of components in our most complex products is like 10 times more than the components that are on the Raspberry Pi itself. So the amount of electronics is can be huge. That of course also creates a lot of challenges. Then there are things that are not well. I have to say that again, many of these things are covered by Raspberry Pi. Others are covered by the community. So the community of people using Raspberry Pi, they're usually quite open to share their own problems. So in many cases, when you have a problem, you find someone who already had that problem and maybe a solution attached. That's also part of the nice positive side effects of something being uh, very community driven, where information is much more openly shared than on a fully proprietary platform. And so this really helps. So there are challenges, but they are in a sense softened by the fact that you have a computing core that is very commonplace.
And I'm sure those listening will definitely empathise and relate with you with regards to the difficulties with hardware design and what to do when something goes wrong. On that note, I just wanted to finish up by asking you what lessons have emerged from real world deployments that you can share with our listeners.
Yeah. Well, real world deployments are interesting. As I very briefly mentioned at the beginning, we develop basically products that are edge servers, IO modules, and environmental sensors. They're called Strato, Iono, and Exo. And the names come from the combination of with the Sfera Labs. If you think Sfera is the Italian translation of sphere, so think of stratosphere, ionosphere, and exosphere. That's where these strange names come from. So the layers of the atmosphere. And these products are used as because they are both edge servers and IO modules and environmental sensors are used in many different application environments. And the real world scenarios are huge. We see, let's say, extreme applications like from these products being used, I don't know, in Alaska to track maritime traffic in an environment that is, as you can imagine, very very complex because of the weather and the challenges of the specific environment. To using these products being used in, I don't know, small villages in Africa to manage electric microgrids for to distribute a little bit of electrical power in small villages, or being used on ships. In general, what I see is that sometimes we are surprised by the applications that users find for these kind of products. One thing that I noticed in, and that goes back to Raspberry Pi again, is that, when you have a product installed in a very, let's say, difficult environment, whether because it's harsh or because it's very far away, is that I kind of like my perception is that for people knowing that they are installing a product that is a product but is based on Raspberry Pi makes the product less, let's say, intimidating, if I can use this word. It makes it more familiar in a sense. For example, if you have one of our basic products and the Raspberry Pi fails and you are in Africa, you don't necessarily have to return the product to us. If the Raspberry Pi fails, you can replace the Raspberry Pi with another Raspberry Pi that you buy locally, for example. So that's interesting. We honestly we didn't think of this, but this is a factor sometimes, and a factor that is strictly a derivative of the fact that these products are based on Raspberry Pi.
It's like a silver lining you didn't see coming, but
Kind of, yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly.
for sure. Well, on that note, I think it's a good point to end. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for sharing. I'm sure our listeners will have lots to think about.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
IoT Unplugged.